Text analysis, whether done using qualitative or quantitative methods, is a way to systematically review written material as part of your research. In this video, I will discuss what we mean by texts in political science, how we can use qualitative coding to break a text down into relevant parts, and how we can use machine learning to speed up that process for large numbers of texts. I will conclude by reminding that this type of analysis is not always the best way to understand texts and documents. Text analysis is a way to categorize and extract additional meaning from a large amount of written information. It's a way of systematically analyzing written data by breaking documents down into their parts. For the purpose of this type of research, a text can be just about anything. It could be your own meeting notes, a historical figure's journal entries, social media posts, or written descriptions of images. And you can find this type of material in many different places, including archives, scraping the web, datasets that include written documents, or you can generate it yourself. To be systematic in your approach to analyzing these documents, you need to be systematic in how you obtain them. We look at this in the same way that we decide how to conduct a survey, looking at the population, frame, and sample. After identifying the overall type of documents you will study, you need to systematically search for them. For example, if you want to analyze news articles, you need to decide which databases you will search for them in, and what dates you want to cover. Finally, you need to decide how to take a sample. Often in text analysis, we actually do a census. We want to read all of the journal entries or all of the meeting notes. But if you're studying social media posts, you might want to start with a random sample of messages. You can conduct qualitative coding on a small sample in order to train your computer to analyze them all. Text analysis usually comes down to coding text. What this means is identifying words or phrases that match the variables you're interested in, and then seeing how often they appear in the text. There are two ways to do this, a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Both of them, though, require that you know what variables you're interested in studying. The top-down approach involves thinking through all the relevant concepts that might relate to your variables. This can work well for large volumes of short texts. For example, in its study of the history of the Black Lives Matter hashtag, Pew Research Center could easily assume a significant number of tweets were related to police violence and search for words related to that topic. But you're not always going to be sure what the concepts in a document might be. If you are transcribing notes or journal entries, you might want to read a few first and get a sense of the content and how it is expressed. You can identify general trends in what's being discussed, and then use those categories to inform the variables and code words you then look for. That's the bottom-up approach. The last thing you want to be attentive to in coding is what information you actually want to gather about these concepts. Are you counting up the number of references? Examining the context in which they're mentioned? Looking for tone, positive or negative, for example? Looking for steps in a process? There are lots of types of meaning that you could look for. You just need to be clear about what it is that you want. The process I just described is qualitative. It is done by people reading documents and making decisions. One of the weaknesses of qualitative research, though, is external validity. It's difficult to replicate others' work. In order to address this concern, we typically have more than one person code the documents we're interested in. By cross-checking the differences between how different individuals described different texts, we can determine how accurate our coding actually is. That is called checking intercoder reliability. Quantitative approaches to text analysis essentially scale up these same strategies to larger numbers of documents. This can mean anything from using R or Python to count incidences of words or patterns of words to what is called natural language processing, training a simple AI how to identify the tone or context of phrases. I will mention two common techniques here. The first is to mine data from social media posts. So I'm not sure what the future of this method will actually be, but Facebook and Twitter used to make posts available to researchers for projects. This was done through an API, an application programming interface that allowed scholars to read the content of social media posts without obtaining personally identifiable information. So, for example, this allowed for research projects on the frequency and content of social media posts during the Arab Spring. Another common phrase you will hear is scraping the web. This just means using a computer program, again like Python, to collect raw data from websites. This allows you to analyze blogs or Reddit entries, pretty much anything online that's not password protected. The principle behind quantitative text analysis, though, is the same as for qualitative coding. You need to identify the variables you're interested in, and what words, phrases, or patterns are associated with them. In conclusion, text analysis, whether qualitative or quantitative, is a powerful tool you can use to compare and contrast documents. I do want to end with a note of caution, though. Coding text is not the same as reading them. Coding and this type of analysis can help you quantify tone or compare documents to each other, but it doesn't tell you the overall meaning of a text. Text analysis should only be used when it actually makes sense to break a text down into its parts.